50% of the vote. Companies like Uber, Lyft, and Instacart spent more than $200 million to gather support for Proposition 22, which exempts them from a 2019 law that would have turned their drivers into employees.
The alternative to inaction was very bad for drivers, very bad for riders, very bad for the economy in a pandemic.
And bad for your company.
And bad for our company.
Some labor experts worry that this is the beginning of the end of worker protections.
Prop 22 is probably the most dangerous labor law that has been passed or voted on in my lifetime. They've sort of taken a desire that companies have had for, since capitalism began, which is to keep labor costs as low as possible.
The new law guarantees 120% of minimum wage while a driver has a passenger. And Lyft co-founder John Zimmer says it gives drivers what they want.
Drivers on a 6-to-1 margin prefer being an independent contractor to an employee, but also we're able to add benefits for independent contractors for the first time.
Right.
So healthcare benefits and disability benefits and protections and insurance that we weren't able to provide before without making individuals employees.
What drivers don't get is paid time off, sick days, or unemployment insurance. That could save these companies 20% on employee costs. And as independent contractors, legal challenges will be more difficult than they are for employees.
Protecting their flexibility and providing historic new benefits are what we're fighting for.
Steve Gregg says he doesn't feel protected.
I feel manipulated and exploited. I don't feel spoken for.
Gregg did 16,000 rides as a full-time driver for Uber and Lyft until the pandemic hit.
Oh, I love the work because I just fell in love with the human race doing this. And I stayed a driver despite the decreases in pay.
He says that Proposition 22 will make it impossible to earn a living driving full-time.
They're trying to push it down into a minimum wage job. You should get paid by tips.
Driver pay has fallen for years, and the companies still aren't profitable. But Lyft gained $1.8 billion in market value the day after Proposition 22 passed.
Is it fair to have companies like yours essentially setting labor law across the country?
No, it's not the role of a company to set labor law. I wish you could get all money out of politics and just have good conversations, but there's money on both sides, and there's influence on both sides.
Although, let's be fair, the pro forces spent more than $200 million on Prop 22. The con forces spent not even $20 million.
Yeah, if you look at it that way, that's fair.
Will you do this in other states?
This is a new way of getting flexibility that people want with a great set of benefits. So absolutely, I think that the next step is to work with politicians, regulators, drivers, and potentially labor leaders, hopefully, across the country to bring this to more places.
Jake, I'm not entirely sure what to make of this story. Having lived in California and watched Lyft kind of evolve as the friendlier competitor to Uber with the new pink mustaches and kind of being a friendlier company, it clearly has decided to throw its weight and its wealth around. I do know taxi drivers who switched to Lyft and say they make a much better living doing Lyft, but at the same time, I do not buy that these companies can't afford to provide benefits. That can't be true. I'm not sure what to make of this at the end of the day. How do you see this?
Right. Well, so I think it's very interesting what you're raising here, Joshua, and certainly people like Vina Dubal from UC Hastings and other labor experts that we spoke to, they are very critical of this, and they basically say that there was a false choice put in front of drivers, that they were told you can either have flexibility or you can be a full-time employee, but you can't have both. They would say that's not true. There is some sort of other way to do it. In this particular case, I mean, what we're talking about here, right, is a set of rules that truly benefit these companies that are taking advantage of what is particular to California and a handful of other states across the country where you can really have a direct ballot initiative. And so those critics are certainly saying that this was sort of marketed on the basis of misinformation to these drivers. That said, Lyft, Uber, the rest of them, they would say, this is the best way forward. We can be a company that can function. You guys can have flexibility. That's certainly their argument. But certainly labor observers are very, very upset about this.
On the flip side of that, I do think that John Zimmer, Lyft's co-founder and president, did say something shrewd, which is that, there's money in politics on a number of levels. San Franciscans remember the so-called, Twitter tax break, where they were given a tremendous tax break to build this new headquarters in downtown San Francisco. Senator Tom Tillis, who just won his re-election race, recently said that we have MySpace laws in a TikTok world. So it feels like the role of government to regulate companies like Lyft, Uber, Grubhub, Instacart, and others is just, they're not doing it. So absent that, this feels pretty inevitable.
Well, and in this case, I mean, let's just be clear that any hope there was for people who wanted greater regulation on the gig economy in California, that's out of the window, right? Prop 22 essentially makes it such that if a new, if a city or a county decides it wants to try and add new rules to the gig economy, they cannot do it under Prop 22. This takes it entirely out of their hands. And, researchers have complained for years that they haven't had any direct access to the data inside companies like Uber or Lyft to be able to check these claims about how much they're being paid or whether it's equivalent to a taxi driver's earnings, the rest of it. And in this case, now that this is happening, Prop 22 says that drivers will make at least 120% of minimum wage. But it's not at all clear how regulators would even be able to check on that because they don't have any regulatory oversight under Prop 22 for going in and saying, show us the degree to which that's true. So, I mean, this is an enormous win, and that's why you can imagine, John Zimmer definitely was saying, I am interested in looking at this in other places across the country, and people are expecting this to probably be something that now companies are going to try and push into other sectors beyond driving, beyond delivery. Maybe it's nursing, maybe it's retail, where these kinds of propositions, these kinds of laws could be a new norm, Joshua.
To be continued. Thank you, Jake. That's NBC Tech correspondent Jake Ward.